All right, I think we're live. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. We'll give another minute for the stragglers to come in, but we appreciate you guys being on this webinar with us to talk everything yard, geek out about RFID tags, and share some real life expertise from a fantastic guest. We've also got our solutions consultant for Opendock, Tyler, man in the chat. So if you have questions, want to weigh in on something, or if I get something terribly wrong, shout it out in the chat and Tyler will correct me promptly and we'll get back on track. All right. So let's get going. Some basic housekeeping rules. We are recording this. We're gonna share it afterwards. We'll share it over email, blogs, all that kind of thing. Use the chat for questions. Feel free to type them in. Tyler's there. He'll interrupt and interject anything that's timely. If not, we'll grab it at the end. And after the session, we'll share some helpful resources, contact details, and if you want to reach out and learn more. So, what we're talking about today, talking about yard visibility and really focus on RFID. And with that, we have an excellent guest here. So today we have Jim Richardson, the traffic manager at Cambro Manufacturing. And I'm going to do my best here on the intro, and Jim can correct me. But Cambro makes durable plastics for the food service industry. So things like food storage, trays, pans, shelving, service carts, all those things that make the food world go round that you don't always remember right away. And you realize, oh, what would we do without it? And Jim's been there for almost 22 years, working everything from order entry to customer service, shipping, and now managing logistics. He did internationally previously, now domestic. I think I've got the spiel right. Did I hit it, Jim?
Yep, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being with us today. And I'll give a little of an intro and primer on the topic. And then after that, we're going to hear from who we're meant to hear from. And that's Jim, not me. So, look, today we're talking about the yard visibility, favorite subject of mine, kind of in the simplest terms. How do you know where the heck stuff is, right? We're asking questions like, have these products arrived and been received? What trucks are at shipping and receiving doors? How many containers are on site? How long have they been here? Where the heck is XYZ container that we've been looking for that has these items we need on it? And where should we move these trailers for our drop pool? You know, in the world of offshore operation teams, AI, camera tech, and labeling quickly rising the ranks of yard solutions, we're seeing this really come to the top of mind for everybody. But before there were cameras, we had RFID tags. And the first ones of those were patented in the 70s, kind of recognized in the 80s. And in the mid 90s, we've got some ultra high frequency RFID tags. So they had ranges up to 20 feet and they kind of gave it some mainstream viability. And that's when we started seeing them in commercial logistics. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, they started to take off. And it's a common topic we get across the Opendock customer base. Questions like, should we use RFID tags? And the truth is, and probably not always the most satisfying answer is, that depends. So that's why we have Jim here to kind of talk about some of his experience with RFID at their facilities at Cambro. So, Jim, kind of jumping off, what problem were you trying to solve that led you to consider RFID as a solution? Like, what were you guys experiencing where you thought, well, gosh, we need to find something and we think RFID might be that thing?
The main impetus that drove it originally was we have manufacturing and distribution in two different locations in the same cities, basically. Both states we're in. They wanted to streamline the receiving process for finished goods and felt if they used RFID, it could just be scanned onto a trailer. We'd know what trailer it was on. We knew when it got to our dock, and all we had to do was scan it in, not receive each individual thing, and it would update. We just put it into inventory. That was the initial thinking of why we were using it. It would also offer you that ongoing visibility. Where is it in the process, and where can you find it currently?
That makes sense. I think that's really common, but you kind of highlighted something that I think is a good perspective to consider. So you guys had a manufacturing and a distribution facility. So when you're thinking about this, did that make a big impact? Because I assume most of the vehicles and equipment coming in were your own vehicles, or they were very standardized. It was the same product every time coming from manufacturing. What did that look like for you guys?
Well, it depends on what product they're running on what we're going to be getting at any given time.
Got it.
But the IPT process, the interplant transfers, I have a contracted carrier that I use that did our yard management and our moves between manufacturing and receiving the distribution center. Initially, when they were looking at this, um, was right after we were all, when I started, there was only really two facilities, and they were both in Huntington Beach. They were just on opposite sides of the town. So it was pretty manageable. It was 5 minutes from manufacturing to get product over to distribution. We moved to a new distribution facility that was probably about 45 minutes out from manufacturing to an hour. And that's when we started using now I can't even think of the name of it, but we had tracking devices on all the trailers when we were over there. So I could tell exactly when we were going to be receiving them. But at that point, you had to kind of use two separate systems. You use the one system to know what's in the truck, the other system to know where's the truck. And then everything was still being done manually.
Got it. And so when you guys were thinking about RFID and evaluating it, were you thinking of tagging at the product level, the pallet level, trailers, containers, yard assets, kind of what was the size? I think that's something we get caught up in a lot when people ask us these questions of, oh, how should we use RFID? And we're like, well, are you trying to track the case? Or are you trying to track a truck? Because that's really different. So what were you guys experiencing and how do you think about that?
We our intention, we were using it with the intention of tracking the product. So we were doing it at the carton level.
Okay.
And what I can say is what I have learned in my going on about this, if you're using a conveyor system to load your trailer, you can scan those tags as you load them one by one, build your pallet, and now you know what's on the pallet. We don't use a conveyor system. We build the pallets manually. Then they were trying to scan everything that's on that pallet. So when you got to the other side of the receiving, you run the pallet through. Yeah, you had a lot of interference. You couldn't get good reads on a consistent level.
So I think that's a really big piece too. And as we kind of talk about what your guys' testing looked like for this, it's a lot about how your facility set up today and your process, right? It feels like I think sometimes people think RFID might be a magic bullet. Oh, all of a sudden we'll just know where everything's at. But in reality, I feel like in order to get the most out of RFID, you have to not only have a really great process, but a process that fits RFID. So you mentioned conveyor belt. So
Yep.
when you're thinking about it, if the conveyors are running and you're set up like that, that's probably a good indicator that you might be set up to successfully use RFID because the conveyor really helps facilitate that.
Yeah, you need to set up the infrastructure because the other issue, when I say interference, etc., you needed a 28-foot radius around what you were scanning to not pick up any interference. If another pallet was within that, it would pick up both pallets. If you tried to scan it right as you're taking it off the trailer, it may scan the first six pallets in that trailer because you couldn't get the range to where you needed it to be.
That's a really good that's a really good highlight. And some of us who may not have had as much boots on the ground experience, like those are some things where infrastructure really matters, and some of it you can control, right? You could probably put in a conveyor system, or you could change your process, but it's probably hard to change how those doors are configured and the space between them, right? The building's been built, you kind of have limitations on what you can do there.
Yeah, what they actually tried at one time was they built like I called it a garage. It was kind of a pop up that was lined in foil so as not to pick up anything. And you had to pass it through there to try and scan it.
Okay, so there
And
are.
that still was not successful.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that. So you guys identified the problem, you had some ideas. Your infrastructure might not have been perfect for it. You mentioned manually building pallets and you mentioned maybe space between doors. And it sounds like there were some ideas for workarounds of, kind of building out these garage or blockers, things like that. What did that look like for you guys? Kind of what did you try and what were you seeing? Like what outcomes from that helped you determine like, is this a good fit or not?
The main thing we saw was even when we could isolate the signal, it couldn't penetrate to the depth of the pallet on a regular basis. It all depended on what the product was and how it was stacked. So,
Interesting.
so sometimes, even when you're not picking up scattered signals, it's not drilling down to that bottom carton in the middle of that pallet.
Got it. And so was one of your guys' option to consider, hey, we might not be able to do this at the carton level. Can we do this at the pallet level, or is that even valuable for you?
That wouldn't have been valuable for us only because product is produced as it's produced. It's not always produced at a product pallet volume. You may have one pallet that has 6 different items on it, which was one of the things we were trying to do. Because if it was just simply one pallet of a product, in our nomenclature, I could just put a license plate on that and scan it. I don't need RFID to tell me what's on it. If I, have a pallet that I have a license plate that tells me what's on it, which is really the methodology we've gone to now. We use license plates for everything, and it tells us what's on the pallet.
Okay, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about what you define as a license plate. And then once that's kind of scanned, does it have a list within it that contains all the items? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, as we build the pallets now, we scan as we build the pallet. And then at the end of that cycle, you're able to print a label for it, which we call a license plate, which has a barcode on it. That barcode contains everything that's on that pallet.
Got it. So
And that works most efficiently for us.
yeah, and I think that's a really good highlight too. If you're thinking about RFID, it's thinking about, what type of commodities are we shipping? Are they homogeneous? Are they all the same thing? Are we at the pallet level? Are we at the carton level? How are we building these? Is it conveyors bringing them in? So I think there's a lot of these prerequisite questions that help understand, is RFID a good solution for you? So you guys implemented it as a test kind of, and you had trouble with the scanning. What other things did you learn during that implementation process? What did you kind of discover about RFID, good and bad?
Um, the good thing is if you have the setup, it works the way it's supposed to go. The bad thing I feel that we found out about it is in my opinion, it's a much more expensive, cumbersome process when you're not set up for that kind of volume. When you're dealing with a mixture of types of pallet bills and shipments and all, we're a very unique company. We're not like Pepsi. I don't ship a whole pallet of one flavor of Pepsi. A pallet could have, 20 boxes of 20 different items on it. So we discovered that our business model does not fit into a cookie cutter of what a lot of these things were designed for, where you've got the mass production, like even like an Amazon. RFID may work great for them. Everything's conveyor, everything's scannable. We can't. We have non-conveyable product to begin with. We range from everything down from a case of tumblers for drinking out of all the way up to a 6 foot food bar, and you can't place items like that on a conveyor. So the conveyor system idea was already out the window. And then when you start digging into how much you would have to change to use RFID, it's really not worth it. If we're trying to force ourselves to fit within those confines, when there are so many other easier solutions out there nowadays.
Yeah. So you're
The
telling
light,
me a 6 foot bar cart isn't good to be rolling around on a conveyor belt at all different heights and angles?
no, no, no. When you got a box that's 80 inches long and 50 inches high and 48 inches wide, you ain't even got a conveyor belt hardly that'll fit it, in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about what would good scenario kind of mentioned, oh, these are the challenges you experienced. If someone was asking you, what is a good setup for RFID tags? What are some of those things like I said, you've already touched pretty well on conveyor or similar product, but what other setups do you think make an environment really good to consider RFID tags? Are there certain industries or, is it high value assets and reusable containers or things like that that jump out to you?
None of those things particularly jump out at me, other than if you're consistently shipping the same things over and over again, it may be a fit for you. But you go back to how big is your operation? What is your infrastructure? And what are you willing to change about how you do your business?
I
There
think
are there are a lot of people that as they go, they've kept changing for technology. Those people may be ready for it. Those who are jumping on at the end saying, "Oh, look at this technology, it's a panacea." No, it's really not. Maybe for your business.
that is such a good call out. I think your internal process is such a critical thing when considering RFID, right? If you have and it's not even a good or bad process. If you have a process that doesn't support it, it's probably going to fail, right? RFID is a tool, right? It's a sensor, it's an input. It can really help, and if you have the infrastructure around it, you're probably going to do great with it. But if your business isn't set up or the processes aren't designed for that, RFID is not going to magically fix it for you. It's actually probably just going to compound your problem or give you just a whole new slate of problems to discover, like you kind of went through. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes, that's pretty much exactly what I was thinking. It's not going to magically change anything else you do, and initially get your IT department involved in it for the integration for all of that, um, because it doesn't matter whether it would even work for you if you can't integrate it with your current systems.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. And I think a lot of times people think RFID, oh, I'm magically going to kind of have this GPS like
Yep.
thing that shows where everything's at. And it's like, well, it can get there, but that's not RFID. RFID is the sensors, the reading of it. And then you need something to digest all those readings and then give you something useful, right?
It's as useful in my mind as any other electronic technology. It's only as good as what you're giving it and how you're using it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good highlight. What were some of the things, and I know you didn't roll this out to all facilities, you tested in kind of a controlled area. What were some things you learned about putting in the components, right? People kind of know the basics. There's a tag, there's passive tags, and then there's these RFID readers of various
Yep.
sizes and
Yep.
shapes. Kind of, what did that look like?
That was the secondary problem we run into is equipping every facility with what they would need. Um, every facility has a different purpose for what their exact use is for it and how to integrate it with what they're doing. So it would have required a huge investment in, back to that word again, infrastructure beyond just RFID. And I think that's what people don't understand if they're not. That's why I bring up the IT department. If you don't really know how it works in today's environment, a lot of people think it's as easy as an Apple tag. I just kind of throw it on here and look, I can see where yeah, that's great for one package. It doesn't work in volume when you have 100,000 Apple tags out there, and you've got to have the setup to control all that. And it actually needs to give you useful information and not just be one of those, isn't that a pretty tool? And somebody here does know how to use it, just not me. I'll let you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good way to explain it. I think people, right, we're so spoiled as consumers with like the Apple tag because it just works great. But there's a cost to it, right? That cost is affordable if you're buying one, not if you're buying hundreds of thousands. It
Yep.
doesn't really scale, right? And so in order to make it scale, you put in a heavier front infrastructure of these readers, these systems, your setup. And so then you could put really cheap passive RFID tags that maybe cost a couple pennies. And
Yep.
those can scan, but that's sort of the trade-off to make it scale. So ensuring all these other things are set up appropriately are really critical because it's a big investment, right? It's no small thing. Um, and I've heard, just as many success stories as I heard of failure stories with RFID, but it all came back to the beginning of, oh, they probably could have discovered this way earlier if they had just kind of qualified themselves, right? Like, are we a good fit or not? And doing that legwork, or similar to what you guys did, testing it in a small scale besides just committing to it because I agree when it works perfectly, RFID is pretty incredible. I've seen it work, perfectly or very well at facilities and it's amazing. I could see how it saves them time, resources, reduces lost inventory, and it's just a dream. But if it doesn't work for you, you're kind of just banging your head against the wall. And it's like, we were just never a fit to begin with, no matter how hard we try.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we had discovered. It would just have been a cost that would never have paid itself off.
Right. I think the ROI is such a good call out too, because I think I'm curious if in your experience, peers and other places, have you seen people who maybe just pursue a technology, whether it's RFID or now AI cameras, which I kind of want to ask you a little about, pursue it just because it's kind of the hot topic and there's maybe pressure from a senior leadership team to modernize. And so rather than making sure it's the right solution, they're just getting the most modern solution and trying to fit it in, even if it's not making sense. Have you experienced that or do you see that?
I've experienced that directly with a conveyor system. They purchased a conveyor system based off of somebody's promise of how it would operate. And again, we're back to, yeah, if you're shipping full pallets of the same product, but we don't. And we also have all kinds of customer requirements about pallet heights, labeling. All that is not conducive to that environment. We ended up using an entire conveyor system in our last building just to do parcel because that was the only thing it was actually useful for. Because to try and do LTL on it, all you did was jam up your conveyor as you're trying to restructure everything.
That's such a good example, and it's hard because I think we all know it. It's the right tool for the right job, right? Just knowing when to use a drill versus a hammer, right? Knowing
Yep.
that, but it's hard when you're in these larger, more ambiguous environments. And it's not, again, it's not whether the tools are good or bad or the process is good or bad. It's about fit. And we talk a lot about that in the software world with requirements. Unfortunately, or very fortunately, we're a little luckier in the software world. It's easier to change some of what we do than, changing hardware, changing physical infrastructure. But, after building software for long enough, it can get harder to change. So we experience a lot of those same things. Um, but I'm curious now, I feel like the next wave of this is you talk about somebody selling the promise of what it can do. I feel like the next big promise is, hey, you don't need all this RFID infrastructure and these tags. We have cameras that will do it all for you. And I've seen elements where it works perfectly. I've seen other elements where it's like, hey, this isn't going exactly how we planned. Have you been paying attention to this AI camera space, reading palettes, scanning tools? And if so, do you any thoughts on it?
Um, I'm sorry, I kind of lost that last part. What was that again?
Just kind of thinking about the AI camera world, is that something that it's something I
Uh,
watch a little bit. Have you looked into it? Have you considered that
no,
or any thoughts?
no, we haven't looked into that in our environment. Um, the way we're currently set up, I don't see how that would be of any benefit to us either. As we keep growing, we also just implemented a warehouse management system through Manhattan.
Very cool.
So let me just say that's our first big step. We have always been in an old green screen base. Um, they refer to it as legacy. I refer to it as the AS400.
Yep.
But when you're in that environment at this point, there's not much that's going to be able to work with that of the new technology. So we discovered that we had to build up the other portions of it to be able to. So, for example, if we ever want to go back and revisit RFID, Manhattan would be what we would be using to do that.
That's such a good point too around having the right infrastructure, not just physical, but the other software tools. And we actually had a good question come in from the chat, and I just want to try to see if I'm interpreting it right. But Jim, maybe you can give us a little more color. Just kind of asking about not using a conveyor. Are the products still read when they go through the gate or pass a reader? Can you kind of talk more about why you think the conveyor is especially useful in RFID? And I don't think you're saying hey, without a conveyor, you can't successfully do RFID, but you're saying conveyors actually enable RFID to work a little easier. Can you kind of just elaborate a little on that?
Um, yeah. Sorry, my mind started to wander again.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to come up with, if you're not using a conveyor, are these
Oh,
products
yeah.
coming through like
Sorry.
a gate or a reader of some kind?
The reason I say that is because that's a much better environment because you can scan the RFID tag as you're doing the palletizing
Got it.
right off the conveyor. You could build the scanner into the conveyor.
Got it.
Um,
That's part of that process. As those conveyors drop, you're kind of using that as your scan point to make sure everything that's coming into that pallet is getting scanned and you're maintaining that 100% compliance.
yes, yes. It's a totally different world when you control it at that point. In my mind, it needs to be controlled before you get to building the pallet.
Makes complete sense.
And when
And
when you're manually building, that means you would be manually having to run it through the scanner each time.
right. And I think you touched on something that we talked about here. We've been talking for about 30 minutes. We're gonna kind
Yep.
of start to wrap up here, but I think you segued it really nicely when you talked about implementing a new WMS, right? We
Yep.
think about these other systems that help solve problems, and you kind of need some of this infrastructure, whether it's a warehouse management system, a transportation management system, or kind of the newest kid on the block, yard management, right? I think TMSs, then WMSs, and now YMSs as people mature their tech stack. And using great tools like RFID or camera systems can be fantastic. They can automate a lot of your process. They can help with accuracy. They can have labor savings. They can really make you more efficient, but all that information needs to go somewhere. Those are the sensors, the inputs. They're like the hands, the eyes. They need a brain to process it. And those brains are often the TMS, WMS, and YMS. Some combination of those three are ingesting all of these great inputs, but then they need to make it useful for you. As you kind of touched on, just getting all the data of where things were scanned is, I don't know, a neat party trick, but actually having it instruct how you orchestrate or build things, that needs something to handle it. And so you mentioned your Manhattan system. Now that will give you the opportunity to consider these things because it can digest that information and actually help you change your processes or adjust things or get some KPI that understand where things are going wrong. And so I think it's really important to understand kind of what tools do what. And I thought that WMS call out was great. And we kind of think at Opendock that the next frontier of that is YMS. And so we don't say like, is it RFID or YMS? Is it RFID or WMS? These tools are complementary to each other. And it's about figuring out how they best fit together. So that's kind of how I see it, especially after chatting with you, Jim. But
Yep.
any other parting words or thoughts just on the logistics industry or RFID in particular?
No, just to kind of reiterate what you were just saying, the basic point I was making with that is you have to have the ability to support the programming you will need. And if you're already on a teetering system, you've got some work to do up front before you're even ready to start looking at the RFID.
I think that's the perfect advice. Prerequisites are important. kind of understand what you're getting into. We've got a couple other QAs we'll follow up on after with those people individually. Thank you everyone for the time, and most importantly, thank you, Jim. We appreciate you coming in here and sharing, your 30 years of logistics experience and kind of educating us. So thanks a lot for the time.
You're most welcome.
All right, thanks.
Sorry, I drifted off periodically.
No, as we're reading and trying to sift through these live, it's not as easy as people make it look. We're like
Yeah,
trying to read through the questions and get it right. So
yeah.
thanks everyone for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.